My name is Reese. And on March 15th, I discovered that 3 years of loyalty meant absolutely nothing when measured against one woman's wounded pride. I was standing in my office at 7 in the morning, organizing client files, when Evangeline Beaumont burst through my door like a hurricane in Louboutin heels. Her perfectly sculpted face was twisted with rage, her emerald eyes blazing as she pointed one diamond-encrusted finger directly at me. "You will be terminated today," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Last night at the Children's Hospital charity gala, you deliberately disrespected me. When I approached your table, you remained seated like some kind of peasant. The absolute nerve." Her lips curled into a sneer that made my blood run cold. "My husband will hear about this immediately, and you'll be clearing out your desk before lunch." I felt something crack inside my chest as I realized my entire career was about to crumble because I hadn't jumped up fast enough when the CEO's wife walked by. 3 years of building the international division from 2 clients to 47. 3 years of working weekends, missing family dinners, pouring my soul into this company. All destroyed because Evangeline Beaumont's ego couldn't handle what she perceived as a slight. Before I continue with what happened next, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments if you've ever had someone try to destroy your career over something completely ridiculous? Because what I'm about to share with you involves the most satisfying revenge I've ever witnessed, and you need to hear every single detail. Also, please like this story, subscribe, and click the bell icon because stories like this need to be heard. Let me take you back to how this all started. 8 months earlier, I'd been browsing freelance tutoring websites, looking for extra income to help pay off my student loans. My degree in international business came with a specialty in Mandarin Chinese, thanks to 2 years I'd spent studying in Beijing during college. I was fluent, but more importantly, I understood the cultural nuances that most Western learners missed completely. That's when I found the posting on Elite Academic Services, an exclusive tutoring platform for wealthy clients. Someone needed intensive Mandarin lessons, twice weekly, at their residence. The pay was extraordinary, $300 per session. No name was listed, just an address in the most expensive part of the city and very specific requirements: complete discretion, professional appearance, and absolute confidentiality. I applied using my maiden name, Reese Morgan, instead of my married name that appeared on all my work documents. I styled my hair differently, wore glasses I didn't normally need, and dressed more conservatively than my usual office attire. When you're working with ultra-wealthy clients, they often prefer their staff to blend into the background. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, and everything inside screamed money. That's where I first met my student, though I had no idea who she really was. She introduced herself simply as Eva, and her attitude told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed people like me. "You're here to teach me Mandarin," she announced without even a hello. "I need to be conversational within 6 months. Not just basic phrases, I need to conduct business meetings, negotiate contracts, and sound sophisticated. Can you do that? Or should I find someone else?" I nodded politely. "Absolutely. What's your current level?" She waved her hand dismissively. "I know some words. Let's just start." Within 10 minutes, I realized Eva knew almost nothing. She mispronounced basic greetings, mixed up tones completely, and became visibly frustrated when I corrected her. But she was determined, I'll give her that. Every session, she pushed herself harder, though she treated me like I was nothing more than a highly paid servant. "Bring me coffee next time," she'd command at the end of lessons, "and make sure you use the service entrance from now on. The doorman shouldn't see tutors coming through the main lobby." I needed the money, so I smiled and nodded. $600 a week was worth swallowing my pride. As months passed, I learned more about Eva's motivation. She was working on what she called the deal of a lifetime, a joint venture with Chinese investors worth $50 million. She'd convinced everyone in her social circle that she was fluent in Mandarin, that she'd studied it extensively, and that she was the perfect person to handle international negotiations. "My husband thinks I'm naturally gifted with languages," she bragged during one session. "Everyone at the country club is so impressed when I drop Mandarin phrases into conversation. They have no idea how business really works." The irony was painful. Eva could barely string together a coherent sentence in Mandarin, even after months of intensive lessons. Every word had to be written phonetically for her to pronounce correctly. Her grammar was elementary at best, but she was living in a fantasy where she was this sophisticated international businesswoman. Meanwhile, at my day job, I was actually doing the work she pretended to do. I'd built our company's Asian market division from nothing. I spoke with Chinese clients daily, handled complex negotiations, and had personally closed deals worth millions. But Eva, who I still didn't know was Evangeline Beaumont, was playing pretend with her husband's money. The breakthrough came 6 weeks before that terrible morning in my office. Eva was practicing her presentation for the Chinese investors, and it was a disaster. She couldn't remember basic business terms, kept confusing yes and no, and was essentially speaking gibberish with a confident tone. "This isn't working," I told her gently. "You need more practice with fundamental concepts before attempting complex negotiations." Her face turned bright red. "Are you saying I'm stupid?" "Not at all. Mandarin is incredibly difficult. Most people need years to reach business-level fluency. I don't have years." She exploded. "This presentation is everything to me. It's my chance to prove I belong in the business world, not just as some trophy wife. You have to make this work." That was the first time I saw real vulnerability in her. Beneath all the arrogance and entitlement was someone desperate to be taken seriously. I actually felt sorry for her. "We'll work extra sessions," I promised. "I'll create phonetic scripts for your entire presentation. You can memorize it word for word." Her relief was obvious. "You can't tell anyone about this. If people knew I was getting help." "Of course not. Client confidentiality is sacred to me." Over the next month and a half, I basically rewrote her entire presentation in phonetic Mandarin. We practiced for hours until she could recite it perfectly, though she still didn't understand what she was saying. I created backup materials, alternative phrases for different scenarios, and even coached her on proper bowing techniques and cultural customs. She started treating me slightly better during this period, not as an equal, but at least like a valued employee rather than disposable help. She'd offer me drinks, ask about my background, and occasionally say please and thank you. "You're quite good at this," she admitted one evening. "Where did you learn to speak so fluently?" I told her about my studies in Beijing, my business degree, and my work in international markets. I was careful not to mention company names or specific details that might connect me to my day job. "Impressive," she said, though her tone suggested she still saw me as hired help who just happened to be educated. "You should consider working for a real company instead of just tutoring." If she only knew. 2 weeks before the investor presentation, Eva was finally hitting her stride. She could deliver the entire pitch smoothly, answer basic questions, and even handle small talk about weather and travel. She was nowhere near fluent, but she could fake it well enough for a formal business meeting. "I'm going to be magnificent," she declared after our final practice session. "Those investors won't know what hit them. This deal will change everything." I smiled and packed up my materials. "You've worked incredibly hard. I'm sure it will go well." That's when she made the comment that would haunt me later. "You know, I'm attending a charity gala this weekend. It's for the Children's Hospital, and all the important business people in the city will be there. I'll finally be able to show off my language skills to everyone." My heart sank. The company I worked for was a major sponsor of that same gala. I'd be there representing our international division, sitting at our corporate table. There was a good chance I'd see Eva, though she still had no idea who I really was. I considered canceling, or at least warning her somehow, but I couldn't figure out how to do it without revealing my identity. Besides, what were the odds we'd actually interact? It was a huge event with hundreds of attendees. The gala was beautiful. Our company had purchased an entire table near the front, and I was seated with our senior management team and their spouses. I'd chosen an elegant black dress, styled my hair in an updo, and worn contact lenses instead of my usual glasses. I looked completely different from the conservative tutor Eva knew. Halfway through dinner, I spotted her across the room. She was radiant in a stunning silver gown, holding court at what was obviously the most prestigious table in the venue. She was animated, gesturing expressively as she spoke to the people around her. Even from a distance, I could tell she was having the time of her life. Then I saw him, the man sitting beside her, nodding and smiling as she talked. My blood turned to ice as recognition hit me like a freight train. Ava was Evangeline Beaumont, the wife of my CEO. The woman I'd been tutoring for 8 months was married to my boss. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, barely touching my food, praying she wouldn't notice me. When dessert was served, I excused myself to use the restroom, hoping to avoid any chance encounters. But fate had other plans. As I was returning to my table, Evangeline was walking directly toward me. She was heading to greet someone at a nearby table, and our paths would intersect in seconds. I quickly sat down and focused intensely on my plate, hoping she'd pass by without paying attention to me. That's when everything went wrong. "Reese?" a voice called out. "Reese Patterson?" One of my colleagues was trying to get my attention from across the table. I looked up automatically, responding to my name, just as Evangeline walked past. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. I saw confusion flicker across her face, like she almost recognized me but couldn't quite place where from. Then, the moment passed, and she continued walking. I thought I was safe. I thought those 2 seconds of near recognition wouldn't matter. I was so incredibly wrong. The next morning, she stormed into my office with murder in her eyes, and I finally understood what had happened. Evangeline had spent the entire night trying to figure out where she knew me from. When she couldn't place my face, she'd convinced herself that I'd deliberately snubbed her by not standing when she passed my table. In her mind, some random employee had disrespected the CEO's wife at a charity gala, and that simply could not be tolerated. "Pack your things," my boss said after Evangeline finished her tirade and stormed out. His face was grim, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Reese. I really am. But I can't have this kind of drama at home." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're firing me because I didn't stand up fast enough when your wife walked by? She says you deliberately ignored her, that you made her look foolish in front of important people. That's insane. I was eating dinner and didn't even realize she was there." He sighed heavily. "It doesn't matter. She's made up her mind, and arguing with her will only make things worse for both of us. I'll give you excellent references, and I'll make sure you get a generous severance package." I felt my entire world collapsing. 3 years of perfect performance reviews, countless successful deals, relationships with clients who trusted me completely. All of it meant nothing because Evangeline Beaumont's pride had been wounded. That's when inspiration struck. "Before I go," I said calmly, "there's something you should know about your wife's big presentation with the Chinese investors." I walked to my computer and opened my email account. With a few quick clicks, I sent him a message with video attachments from every single tutoring session I'd recorded for my own reference. "Check your email," I said quietly. His face went pale as he opened the first video. There was Evangeline, stumbling through basic Mandarin phrases, asking me to repeat everything phonetically, admitting she couldn't understand what she was saying. "She's been lying to you," I continued. "For 8 months, I've been her private tutor. She can't speak Mandarin beyond memorized scripts. Everything she's told you about her language abilities is completely false." I removed my glasses and let my hair down, transforming back into the person Evangeline knew as her tutor. "I'm Reese Morgan," I said, "and effective immediately. Your wife's Mandarin lessons are canceled." The silence in that office was deafening. My boss sat frozen, staring at the computer screen where his wife was clearly struggling with pronunciation that any first-year language student would master easily. The video showed her asking me, over and over, to write everything in English letters because she couldn't read Chinese characters. "This presentation is in 3 days," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know. I helped her prepare every word of it. She's memorized it like a script, but she doesn't understand what she's saying. If anyone asks her an unscripted question in Mandarin, or if she needs to deviate from her prepared remarks even slightly, the whole thing will collapse." He looked up at me with something between horror and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me who you were during the lessons?" "Client confidentiality. She hired me through a tutoring service under strict privacy agreements. I had no idea she was your wife until last night at the gala." Even then, I planned to keep her secret because that's what professionals do. I gathered the last of my personal items from my desk. But since she's decided to destroy my career over an imaginary slight, I figure those confidentiality agreements are void. Wait, he stood up quickly. Don't leave yet. We need to discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Your wife made her choice. I'm just making sure you understand what that choice actually costs. I walked toward the door, then paused. Those Chinese investors aren't just bringing money to this deal. They're bringing their top executives, their translators, and their cultural liaisons. People who will immediately recognize whether your wife can actually communicate or if she's just reciting memorized phrases. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked out of that building for what I thought would be the last time. But I was wrong about that, too. The next 3 days passed in a blur of job applications and angry phone calls from Evangeline. Apparently, my boss had confronted her about the tutoring sessions, and she was furious that I'd betrayed her trust. "You signed confidentiality agreements?" she screamed during one particularly unpleasant voicemail. "I'll sue you for everything you have." I called her back once, mainly out of curiosity. "Actually, Evangeline, you should read those agreements more carefully. They protect client privacy from outside parties, but they don't prevent tutors from defending themselves when clients attempt to damage their careers through false accusations." "I never made false accusations. You told your husband I deliberately disrespected you at the gala, but you and I both know you didn't recognize me there. You're destroying my reputation based on a completely fictional narrative you created in your head." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're still fired." "Yes, I am. And your presentation is tomorrow. Good luck." I hung up and tried to put the whole mess behind me. I had bigger problems to worry about, like finding a new job and explaining to potential employers why I'd left my previous position so suddenly. But I couldn't stop thinking about those Chinese investors. Some of them were people I'd worked with professionally over the past 3 years. Mr. Chen Wei from Beijing Manufacturing, who always started meetings with personal questions about family. Miss Lu Hong from Shanghai Logistics, who appreciated cultural references and traditional greetings. They were coming to this presentation expecting to meet someone who understood their language and their business customs. Instead, they were about to encounter Evangeline Beaumont with her memorized script and her complete ignorance of everything beyond basic pronunciation. The morning of the presentation, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I kept imagining how it would unfold, how quickly the investors would realize they were being deceived, how badly it would reflect on everyone involved. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was James Morrison, my former boss, and he sounded desperate. "Reese, I need your help. I don't work there anymore, remember? The investors are here early. They wanted to have lunch before the presentation, and Evangeline is panicking. She can't handle casual conversation in Mandarin. She's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem anymore. I'll give you your job back. Full reinstatement, a promotion, a raise. Whatever you want. Just please, help us get through this presentation." I considered it for exactly 3 seconds. "No. Reese, please. This deal is worth $50 million to the company. If it falls apart, we'll have to lay off half the international division." "Then you should have thought about that before you fired me for not standing up fast enough when your wife walked by. I know I made a mistake. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. But please don't let our employees suffer because of my bad judgment." That hit me harder than I expected. The international division wasn't just my work. It was built with the help of amazing colleagues who didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of this mess. "I'll make you a deal," I said finally. "I'll come in as a consultant. One time only. I'll help with translation during the presentation, but I'm not doing it to save Evangeline's reputation. I'm doing it to protect the people who still work there." Thank you so much." "And James? After today, I never want to see or speak to your wife again." I arrived at the office 45 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin. The main conference room had been transformed into an impressive setup with multimedia displays, translated materials, and elegant catering that showed respect for Chinese business culture. Evangeline was standing near the windows, practicing her opening remarks under her breath. She looked beautiful and professional, but I could see the terror in her eyes when she noticed me walking in. "What is she doing here?" she hissed at her husband. "Helping to save your presentation," I replied calmly. "Unless you'd prefer to handle the Q&A session on your own?" Her face went pale. We both knew she couldn't handle unscripted questions. "Fine, but you stay in the background. This is my presentation, my deal, my moment." "Understood." The investors arrived precisely on time, which I'd expected. Mr. Chen Wei greeted me in Mandarin, and I responded appropriately, introducing myself as a consultant supporting the presentation. Miss Liu Hong asked about my background in Chinese markets, and we had a brief, pleasant conversation about trade relationships. I could see Evangeline watching our exchange with growing anxiety. The investors were clearly comfortable with me, but when she attempted to join the conversation with her stilted, rehearsed phrases, their polite smiles became strained. "Perhaps we should begin the formal presentation," Mr. Chen suggested in English, clearly sensing the awkwardness. Evangeline took her position at the front of the room and launched into her prepared remarks. I had to admit, months of practice had paid off. Her pronunciation was decent, and she delivered the memorized content with confidence. The investors listened politely, taking notes and occasionally nodding. Everything was going according to plan. Then Ms. Liu Hong raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said in Mandarin. "Could you clarify the logistics timeline for the Shanghai distribution center?" Evangeline's face went blank. The question wasn't part of her script. "I'm sorry," she said in English. "Could you repeat that?" Ms. Liu Hong repeated the question, this time speaking more slowly and clearly. Evangeline looked at me desperately. I could have helped her. I could have translated the question and coached her through an answer. Instead, I remained silent. I think, Evangeline stammered, attempting to respond in broken Mandarin that made no grammatical sense. Mr. Chen Wei frowned and exchanged glances with his colleagues. They were beginning to understand that something was very wrong. "Perhaps," Mr. Chen said diplomatically, "we could continue the discussion in English?" But the damage was already done. The investors had come here expecting to work with someone who could communicate effectively in their language. They'd been promised a partner who understood Chinese business culture and could facilitate smooth international cooperation. Instead, they'd discovered that their primary contact had essentially been lying about her qualifications. Ms. Liu Hong asked another question, this time in English, about regulatory compliance in Shanghai. It was a basic question that anyone involved in Chinese business should be able to answer easily. Evangeline clearly had no idea what to say. She looked at her husband, then at me, then back at the investors. "Perhaps my consultant could address that," she said weakly. I stepped forward and answered the question thoroughly, explaining the regulatory framework, recent changes in compliance requirements, and best practices for foreign companies operating in Shanghai. The investors nodded appreciatively and began directing their follow-up questions to me instead of Evangeline. For the next 20 minutes, I essentially took over the presentation. I answered detailed questions about logistics, cultural considerations, legal requirements, and market analysis. The investors were engaged and interested, clearly impressed with the depth of knowledge I was providing. Evangeline stood to the side, completely sidelined at her own presentation. Finally, Mr. Chen Wei addressed the elephant in the room. "I'm confused about the structure of this partnership," he said carefully. "We were told that Mrs. Beaumont would be our primary liaison, but it seems clear that He looked at me questioningly. "Patterson," I supplied. "Miss Patterson has the expertise we need for this collaboration. Could you clarify who would actually be managing this relationship?" The room fell silent. Evangeline's husband looked like he wanted to disappear. Evangeline herself was staring at the floor, her face bright red with humiliation. "I think," I said gently, "there may have been some miscommunication about roles and responsibilities. Perhaps it would be best to reschedule this discussion after the organizational structure can be clarified." Mr. Chen Wei nodded gravely. "I think that would be wise." The investors gathered their materials and prepared to leave. Miss Liu Hong approached me privately. We were very impressed with your knowledge and professionalism, she said quietly. If you were to represent this company in future negotiations, we would be very interested in proceeding. However, we cannot work with someone who has misrepresented their qualifications so significantly. After the investors left, the conference room felt like a tomb. Evangeline was sitting in a chair, staring at her hands. Her husband was pacing near the windows. And I was gathering my notes, preparing to leave for good. $50 million, James said quietly. Gone. It was never really there, I replied. You can't build international partnerships on lies and pretense. Those investors are too smart and too experienced to be fooled for long. Evangeline finally looked up. This is all your fault. I turned to face her directly. No, Evangeline. This is the consequence of your choices. You chose to lie about your qualifications. You chose to destroy my career over a perceived slight that existed only in your imagination. You chose to prioritize your ego over the success of this deal. I worked so hard on this presentation. You memorized words you didn't understand for a deal you weren't qualified to handle. That's not work, that's performance art. I walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I actually felt sorry for you during those tutoring sessions. You seemed so desperate to prove yourself, to be taken seriously. But respect isn't something you can fake or demand. It's something you earn through competence, integrity, and treating other people with basic human dignity. You're still fired, she said weakly. I laughed. Evangeline, after today, I wouldn't work for this company again if you begged me. But I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks later, James Morrison called me with an interesting proposition. The board of directors had been less than pleased when they learned about the failed investor presentation and the circumstances surrounding my termination. Apparently, several board members had worked with me professionally over the years and were furious that I'd been fired over such trivial reasons. We'd like to offer you the position of Vice President of International Business Development, James said. It comes with a substantial salary increase, your own budget, and complete autonomy over the international division. What about Evangeline? She's no longer involved in business operations. The board made that very clear. I considered the offer carefully. I'll take it, but with conditions. First, I want a written guarantee that family members of executives cannot interfere with personnel decisions. Second, I want the authority to rebuild the international division my way, without interference from anyone. Done. And third, I want a formal apology from the company for my wrongful termination to be included in my personnel file. Absolutely. 6 months later, I'd rebuilt the Chinese investor relationship and successfully closed the deal Evangeline had destroyed. The Shanghai partnership was worth $68 million more than the original proposal and led to additional opportunities throughout Asia. Evangeline, meanwhile, had become something of a pariah in her social circle. Word had spread quickly about her failed presentation and fabricated language skills. The same people who had once been impressed by her Mandarin phrases now whispered about her dishonesty and poor judgment. I heard through office gossip that she'd tried to blame me for sabotaging her presentation, but too many people had witnessed what actually happened. The investors themselves had made it clear that the problem wasn't sabotage. It was incompetence masked as expertise. The final piece of poetic justice came 8 months after that disastrous presentation. James Morrison approached me with a delicate request. The board is considering some changes in executive structure, he said carefully. They're impressed with your work rebuilding the international division, and they're wondering if you'd be interested in taking on additional responsibilities. Such as? They're thinking about creating a new position, Senior Vice President of Global Operations. It would involve overseeing all international business, including partnerships, acquisitions, and strategic planning. I smiled. That sounds like the kind of role that would require reporting directly to the board of directors. It would. And presumably, it would involve significant decision-making authority over the direction of the company's international strategy. That's correct. I pretended to consider the offer. I accept. 3 months later, I was officially promoted to Senior Vice President of Global Operations, making me one of the most senior executives in the company. My office was 2 floors above James Morrison's, and my authority extended across every international deal the company pursued. Evangeline never spoke to me again after that presentation, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. But I heard she'd started taking Spanish lessons from a different tutoring service, probably planning some new scheme to establish herself as an international business expert. I hoped her new tutor was more patient than I'd been. The irony of the whole situation wasn't lost on me. Evangeline had tried to destroy my career because she felt I hadn't shown her proper respect. But her vindictive behavior had ultimately led to the exposure of her lies, the failure of her business ambitions, and my promotion to a position with more authority than she'd ever dreamed of having. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. Looking back, I realized that those 8 months of tutoring sessions had taught me something valuable about people like Evangeline. They're so focused on appearing important that they forget to actually become competent. They mistake performance for substance, arrogance for confidence, and entitlement for leadership. But the business world has a way of exposing pretense eventually. You can only fake expertise for so long before reality catches up with you. And when it does, you better hope the people you've stepped on aren't in a position to step back. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone's lies catch up with them in the most spectacular way possible? Have you ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself led to consequences you never expected? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of workplace drama, unexpected twists, and the satisfaction that comes from watching karma work its magic. Because trust me, this wasn't the last time I encountered someone who thought they could destroy other people's lives without facing any consequences themselves.